Hey everybody, welcome back to the 17th episode of Open Source for Business, brought to you by Open Teams. My name is Henry Badri, and today I talked with Pablo Fuentes and Brendan Collins, who are both founders of Makepath. Makepath is a spatial data science firm that works with companies from all different types of industries, ranging from resource management, finance, and all the way through to retail. Their specialty is bringing open source to the challenges inside organizations. I think that this episode will be really useful to enterprises who want to know how they can actually benefit from working with open source software vendors or experts. Some of the topics that we discuss in this podcast include how Makepath helps clients to solve burning problems with open source software, in addition to exploring the ways in which Makepath, an open source vendor, can help their clients to connect with open source communities that they're involved in. And we also discuss what actually makes the geospatial open source community unique and where it's heading in the future. Whether you are a user, developer, manager, or if you're just curious about the industry, Open Teams is the place to find information, news, training, and support you need to thrive with open source. Now that the introductions are out of the way, let's dive right in. Pablo and Brendan, thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
Hey, good to see you.
Henry, thanks so much for having us.
It's great to have you on. I've really been looking forward to chatting to you both. Now, I thought we'd start with you, Brendan. How did you get where you are today?
So I have a background in geospatial technology. I got interested in geography in the mid-2000s, working in a GIS lab, specifically looking at environmental science and trying to find tools that would help me solve some of the problems that I was looking at on the environmental science side. As I got into geospatial technology, I saw the power of coding and automation, and saw that there was a lot of great integrations with Python. So my love of Python came from a need to solve some problems that I couldn't solve brute force. I think the first major issue that I ran into that required coding was unzipping 200,000 zip files. And it was finally something I couldn't do by hand, and so went to coding. Then in wanting to push further, I organized a group of people to help address client problems using open source tools. And then somewhere down the road, Pablo Fuentes and I met up and realized that we would be a great pair to start Makepath. And a year ago, we started Makepath to bring open source to client problems and also find mechanisms to fund open source technologies.
So I know you've got a bit of history working with the CEO of Open Teams. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey at Anaconda?
Yeah, so I first printed out the guide to NumPy at Kinko's in 2007, and I saw the name Travis Oliphant on the front of that, and started trying to understand what this NumPy library was. And from there, serendipity brought me to Austin and also put me in contact with Travis through the local Python community. I started working alongside Travis at Continuum Analytics, which then became Anaconda. I had the great privilege of actually doing a hackathon with Travis. So Travis and I traveled once to Washington, D.C. to do a hackathon, which was an absolute dream for me. And I really love the work that Travis does, and I use the libraries that he created every day.
Okay, and that would have been great. He's a great guy to work with, and he's just so knowledgeable, and his passion for open source is unequivocal. I have never met anyone like him. He's so giving. But Pablo, I know you've got quite an entrepreneurial background. So what's your journey from entrepreneur into open source? What does that look like?
Sure, absolutely. So, I've always been interested in numbers and in data. I used to be in the investment world before going to grad school. After I got my MBA at Stanford, I started a product company that helped people get jobs using mobile phones. So I was the CEO and founder of a product company for 10 years. And after I sold that company in 2019, about a year after that, Brendan and I got together and started thinking about working together. And I have a passion for building products. I have a passion for coming up with solutions. And ever since I was a little kid, I liked maps. My dad used to take me up, but he was a biologist and a professor in the university. he would take me up in the hills, and we would read topo lines, so I always had an interest in maps and all of the things that have to do with understanding the physical space. And yeah, it's been great. The expertise that Brendan brings to the table on the open source side is unparalleled, and it's amazing. I feel really lucky and blessed to work with him as a partner. And a lot of what I bring to the table is the ways to think about product, and also the ways to build a business. And as we've grown our team and our company, we have over a dozen people now working on Makepath, and we're getting some great companies. We have partnerships with Fortune 50 companies. We also have some great open source grants that we've gotten from people to work on open source initiatives. I've been learning more and more about the open source community. It's not something that I had a passing understanding of open source tools through some of the tools that we use to build a product in my last company. But I've certainly, the last year has been a very quick and brisk education in all things open source. And it's just a great community to be a part of. I think the notion and the idea that you give things to the community, and the community keeps giving back to you. I mean, we hire most of the people that we hire from people that contribute to open source projects that we're a part of, and we also find a lot of our clients and a lot of our partners from other people through, I guess, people who are also interested in open source. And one of the key principles of our company, we have this running list of key principles that Brendan and I run the company by. We have 6 of them, and I have them on a little note here that I look at every day. And one of them is give things away, serve your community, and the rest will take care of itself. And that's not only on the software side, but also everybody at Makepath gets 1 day a month that they get paid to go work in their local community and volunteer in the local community in some capacity, and really help their community, face to face. And obviously, as COVID is beginning to subside, and hopefully by the end of this year we'll be back in some semblance of what used to be normal. People will be able to get back and face to face with their communities. But that idea of getting more through giving more is something that's been a really amazing part of working with the open source community.
I think that's definitely very inspiring and something a lot more companies should be involved in. I know that companies are starting to take contributing back to open source communities a lot more seriously. A lot of companies are employing open source contributors like yourself. And I think I really appreciate the idea that you've taken the open source ethos and idea of giving back to community and brought it to the physical world of not just an online community, but to your local community. I think that would make such a huge difference. And I'm interested because I'm not currently in Austin. There was a huge community effort to help with the recent problems that came from the snow, wasn't there? What did that look like, and how did the community come together in Austin?
Pablo, I can cover that one. So there's certainly there were a lot of problems, and I'm not going to say that it came together in some beautiful way. It was nice to be able to communicate with neighbors in that sort of time. A lot of crisis brings people together, and there was certainly that. But that was an unprecedented blizzard for the Central Texas, and was a really difficult time. But that is continues as people repair, and they repair the grid. But it was a difficult week.
Okay.
My personal situation is my wife and I were supposed to be out of town for 3 days that weekend, and we were unable to come back to Austin because of our flights kept getting canceled. So we had our neighbors check on our cat. Unfortunately, we never lost power, and our dog was being taken care of by somebody else, so everything was fine. But I kept on texting people and asking them if they needed it, because our place never lost power. And so if we had friends come to our place and take showers, I have a bunch of wood in the side of the house that I offered to people that didn't have power so they could heat their homes. And also Reddit, of all things, the number one source for information of what was going on was the Austin Reddit forum, where people were sharing information of what was going on and ways to help each other. And that's open sourcing solutions, because really, frankly, I love the great state of Texas, but the government didn't exactly do a stellar job at managing communications or managing supplies or anything like that. Nor did the city. So the number one source that I had for information that I deemed to be directionally accurate was the Austin Reddit, much more so than local news outlets. So that's in some ways a way to open source and community drive the answer to a weather crisis.
I definitely agree. And I think as we're all becoming more digital, it definitely has helped, particularly during COVID. I think that people have jumped online and come together as online communities to support each other. But now, just to shift gears a little bit, I'd like to focus on Makepath. So, for those listening, what does Makepath do and what kind of services do you offer?
So, Makepath is a spatial data science firm. We work with a variety of clients in different industries, everything from natural resource management to finance to retail, and we bring open source to the challenges inside these organizations. Many times, those they look at us for expertise in geospatial technology, but we have a breadth of expertise in data science topics that range from distributed computing to algorithm optimization to specific geospatial analysis and also visualization. We love beautiful applications and think that it's really part of the communication of the insight. We're trying to get to insights using information and using data. So when we can communicate those insights in a beautiful way, we think that that is a worthy thing to focus on and focus resources towards. We also really focus on nurturing early open source developers. So people that are trying to get into the community, get visibility into the community. And so a big part of Makepath is being a nurturing place for new engineers and new devs that want to get into open source and need a shot. So we have one is serving our outside clients, and we're very passionate about that. But then also serving our team and serving the community to develop our engineers and help them with their careers as they go forward.
I think that's great. And I think, again, hiring open source developers makes such a huge difference just on the community and the ecosystem as a whole. We think that is one of our missions at Open Teams, and that Travis is very passionate about, is making open source thrive. And
Yeah.
we think really that can only happen when you can join open source and become a part of a community with the expectation that you can make a living out of your passion or hobby. Because historically, Travis Oliphant, he started NumPy and SciPy, and he had 6 kids, and for a decade was just, it was difficult to be able to get by because he's devoting so much of his time to open source. So he had to be innovative in all of the other ways of renting out his time. And I think now that companies are starting to get more involved, like yours, like the big tech companies, they're starting to employ open source contributors. I'm really excited to see the next phase of open source with this sustainability in mind, this idea that we want to help people actually make a living and build a career around open source. We think there's a long way to go, and I'm very, very excited about that.
One thing I wanted to add to that is also it's a virtuous cycle, right? So there are companies and organizations that are paying us because they care about the tools that we're developing. So we have X-Array Spatial. That was a tool that was pioneered by Brendan here on this call, and that is one of our main projects alongside DataShader and Bokeh that we have core contributors to. And there are companies that are coming to us that see the value that these projects have to their initiatives and to the community, and they are engaging us and paying us money to build these tools out. And the virtual cycle happens because then when people come to us, so developers, we're constantly hiring. So we'll do like this small plug here. We are hiring. So if you're interested in working in open source, please do reach out to us at contact.com, and we'd love to talk. But a lot of times when people reach out to us, and we have many conversations per week with people who are interested in working with us, we tell them, hey, the number one way in which you can impress us or get in touch with us for us to start aligning with each other is for you to make contributions to some of the open source projects that we work on. And it doesn't mean you have to do huge commits that are going to change, or even add meaningful features. It can start with something as simple as adding documentation. Obviously, documentation is always something that's very, very important with code and with libraries, because regardless of how brilliant something that you write is, if somebody else can't understand it, it doesn't, it goes against the ethos of what we're doing with open source. So the virtual cycle continues because people are able to build their careers because they're making contributions that are available in a public forum, and their GitHub profile becomes their resume. And then we end up hiring them, or other people in the community end up hiring them for their contributions. And then that means that everybody benefits from this virtual cycle in the ecosystem. And that's something, again, we're really excited to be a part of.
I think that idea that you're hiring the open source contributors and then allowing companies to come in and work with you rather than working directly with the community is revolutionary in itself, and something we're big believers in at Open Teams. So what does that look like? So you're hiring open source contributors and then you're going out, and your clients, are they directly involved with the community, or are you the middleman in between the enterprise and the community?
Yeah, so it varies. Some of our clients actually don't know that much about open source, but have a burning problem that they need to solve. And so they're less inspired by open source and more inspired by the solutions that open source brings. Then there are other clients that come to us specifically because of our involvement in those projects. And that's really fun, because a lot of times that means that they're excited about contributing back to the project. They're interested in doing spin-off projects. So in some of our engagements, we'll find a new niche for an open source project that didn't exist, and we can go ahead and try to fill that niche. One of those is a library called Map Shader, which is very recent. It's about a month old, and that fills the niche of connecting HTTP to Data Shader. So Data Shader is a great library that was started by Peter Wang and really grown by Jim Bednar. And we wanted to hook that up to OGC, which is the Open Geospatial Consortium map services. So we take a open specification from OGC and we combine it with an open tool like Data Shader. And then we have something that serves the GIS community, even though they may not be familiar with NumPy or Dask or Numba. They can still benefit from those technologies that might have been developed in a different domain.
I think that's a really great thing that's come from enterprises working with open source communities. The idea that you can discover new innovations, new technologies. And you brought up Peter Wang, who started Data Shader. And I know that Travis and Peter and everyone at Anaconda, that entire company has been responsible for creating some incredible projects. Dask spun out of Anaconda, Bouquet, Data Shader, as you said. And I think it's that PyData ecosystem, that idea of innovation and the open source ethos that they embody allows them to just create. So that leads me on to my next question. What are some of the most common problems that you at Makepath help your clients to solve?
So one of the things that we talk about at Makepath always is visualizing what's hiding in your data, right? So a lot of times we work with clients that have very, very large data sets, to where traditional tools and are not able to give you the insight that you need to understand that data. So a lot of what we do is using our open source tools and scientific Python to understand and create visualizations and custom visualizations, and that can take many different shapes. That can be fully developed, front to back apps that it's like a fully standalone project. It could also take the shape of features. And I don't know, Brendan, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So just to add on to what Pablo is saying, a lot of times the problems are framed in the classic 3 V's of big data, right? Of variety, volume, and velocity. So we have people that come to us with, hey, we have a mess on our hands and we need someone to come in and help us with this variety. Or they say, hey, it's well structured, but it's just too big for our machine, and that's a volume problem. Or hey, we have this down, but it's slow, and we need to take this operation and scale it. And maybe that's the velocity side. Most of the clients have all three, so we're touching in different spots. And we're looking at a lot of the work that was done by Travis and to help solve these problems. And that work comes in the form of NumPy and SciPy and Numba and Conda and the amazing tools that are in the PyData ecosystem that help us solve those problems that many of our clients don't know about.
That was a great explanation of the different problems that clients come to you with, and the idea that you can easily sum up those problems to the three V's, the variety, volume, and velocity. Since you've worked a lot with open source communities over the years at Anaconda and now at Makepath, I'd like to ask, what are some of the key things that you've learned working with these open source communities and building these open source tools that enterprises use?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of guiding principles. One of them that we use at Makepath is that we really want to put the user first and think about the user problem before we become too prescriptive with technologies or tools. We love the tools that we work on, but ultimately we're about change and being able to use the best tools for the problem. So putting the problem first and making sure that the open source tools that we're creating keep that user in mind and speak to that user. In the case of Xarray Spatial, we're speaking to the geography community. So we're using language that they know. We're meeting them where they are, as opposed to trying to to reinvent some nomenclature. And that's a lot of what open source is about, is like, what culture does this tool come from, and who does it serve exactly? So in our case, in Xarray Spatial, we want to have a function called slope, because geography people understand what slope is. We don't want to call it gradient. We don't want to call it first derivative. And so meeting people where they're at is a key part of open source. And then understanding that a lot of people are dedicating free time to these projects. And there is a sometimes neglect of the fact of how much time goes into these projects and how much people are giving of themselves. And so understanding that as you're using an open source project, being part of that community means kind of contributing back and understanding that it only gets pushed forward if we all work together.
Those are two great things that you've learned over the years working with open source communities. And just to summarize, the first was that you really have to speak the user's language. And the second, that you have to remember that we're all in this together. And if you don't work, then you don't progress. Just to touch again on the first point, I completely agree with you. Because at the end of the day, developers are searching for good solutions for their problems. If you can't frame the problem from the user's perspective, then how do you expect users to quickly understand and use your technology in a way that you intended? I'd like to shift gears again and focus more on the geospatial industry that you're working in. So firstly, what does the geospatial technology industry do better than other industries?
Yeah, one just concrete thing to start off with would be tiling. So in the geography and GIS community, it was known very, very early that tiled maps were an efficient way to move data from the server to the client. So we've taken a lot of when we think of going from geo to other domains, my last example with Xarray Spatial was going from other domains to geo. When we think of geo to other domains, we look at tiling, the handling of geometry. So if we're handling points, lines, and polygons, the geo community is very good at being able to store and analyze that sort of vector data. And then also with handling continuous data in raster formats, the geo community has come out with many different formats, many that overlap domains, but I think of some great ones as being, HDF, which came out in the early 80s, to NetCDF and the GeoTIFF, the Geo package, the shapefile. All of these data formats from the geo world get applied in other domains. So those are a few things from geo, but web mapping has come a long way, and geo has pushed the use of geometry and of rasters for mapping to the web.
It seems like historically the geospatial industry has been quite advanced and ahead of other industries in a lot of different aspects. But when thinking about the future, where is the geospatial industry heading? Where do you see it in 10 years from now?
I guess we focus a lot on seeing what are the tools to scale up and scale out. So as we take the analyses that we know how to do, but scale them to larger problems, that's certainly something. And as we think about scaling horizontally, we look at tools like Dask and what's going on with Dask. So seeing other companies pop up, for instance, like Coiled Computing, supporting specifically the Dask case, we can look at Coiled and say, how could Coiled support not only the Dask case, but also show integrations with Geo? And as we look at scaling vertically, we see a lot of the work that's going on at Anaconda within Numba and the work going on at Quansight and Open Teams with Numba and Dask, and see a future where we're able to target more hardware. So we're able to run our algorithms for spatial analysis on different GPUs or different types of CPUs or cluster configurations. And so those are about taking the tools and that we already know and scaling them out. So some of the things that I'm particularly interested now are distributed path finding. So like distributed near optimal path finding, distributed view shed, which is like line of sight analysis. And how can we scale this so that we can run it more often on more data?
It sounds like the future for the geospatial industry is rosy, and just like the rest of the open source space, I feel like we have so far to go, and it's already grown at an exponential rate, and I think it's just going to keep growing. We're aboard that rocket ship now, and there's no getting off. So thank you, Brendan, and thank you, Pablo, for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you, and I know we'll definitely have you on the podcast at some point in the future. To those of you who tuned in today, thank you so much for watching and listening. If you're watching this on YouTube, then please leave a like and subscribe to see more content like this. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, then please leave a review. It really does help us out to grow the podcast and to get the Open Source for Business name out there. Thanks again, and until next time, thanks y'all.